Presidential power on the verge of a historic new expansion, and we've been following the story of one government official from the very beginning. Rebecca Slaughter was fired, hired, fired again, and now her case has gone all the way to the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court heard arguments yesterday on whether President Trump can actually fire virtually anyone he wants, and that includes our next guest, who served on the Federal Trade Commission and was in the courtroom listening to arguments. The court's conservative majority seemed to indicate that the president should have absolute control over the leadership of government agencies, but the liberal-leaning justices warn that would overturn 90 years of precedent and give the president massive, unchecked power. Back with us again, former FTC commissioner at the heart of this case, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter. Good to have you back, but I wish it was not under these circumstances, Rebecca. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Kara. It's nice to be here.
What was it like to be in court yesterday?
Well, it was a little surreal, honestly. But once I got past that feeling, it was really clear that all of the justices were deeply engaged in the case. I've said from the beginning that this isn't about me or my job, and that was very much on display at the arguments yesterday. It is about not just the agency I serve, the FTC, but a whole host of federal agencies. And it was clear that it's really difficult to come up with any principled distinction between the FTC and, for example, the Fed. So if the court says the president can fire me, there's, as you indicated, pretty much no one he can't fire, and that would include Federal Reserve governors, possibly members of the civil service, and that is a real wholesale change in how our government has operated, not just for the last 100 years that the FTC's been around, but since the founding.
So what are your concerns if indeed the court's conservative majority supports the president on this?
Well, I think the reason that this case matters is it's about two key things. One, it's about whether Congress actually gets to write the laws, and the president has to follow them, which is what our Constitution says. And the second thing it's about is whether the government is going to serve the people or instead be beholden entirely to a president who wants to wield power for the benefits of his friends and to the detriment of his enemies. And Congress decided that when it set up these agencies like the FTC and like the Federal Reserve and about 24 others, that there should be some checks and balances in how the powers that those agencies have are used to avoid political interference and to make sure that the agencies are working to protect everyday Americans and not to do favors for corporate donors or to punish political enemies.
And let's just remind the public, as your role as FTC commissioner, how did you protect us all from those types of possible threats? I mean, remind folks why it's important for this to remain independent.
Sure. It's easy to get confused about the whole alphabet soup of federal agencies.
Exactly. All the three letters.
Yeah. Federal Trade Commission. What the Federal Trade Commission does when it was set up over 100 years ago is to protect consumers and promote competition. And what that means specifically is the Federal Trade Commission reviews merger deals to make sure that they're legal and don't violate our antitrust laws, and that companies can't gain power by illegally gobbling up their rivals and then raising prices. So, for example, in 2024, we successfully challenged a massive grocery store merger. Everybody cares about grocery store prices right now. And the Federal Trade Commission is supposed to be out there looking out for people to make sure their prices don't go up. In consumer protection, the Federal Trade Commission challenges fraud. It looks out for people's privacy. It deals with kids' safety online. And all of these are issues where it's really important that decisions be made on the merits, according to the law and according to the facts, but not to do favors for the president's allies and not under the auspices of political influence.
Point well made. And the Trump administration argues that although the FTC functions independently, it's ultimately part of the enforcement arm of the executive branch. So I guess they make the point or they're trying to make the point that, so why doesn't the head of the executive branch, why shouldn't the president then be able to get involved in personnel decisions?
Well, the laws that Congress passed do give the president some control. The president gets to pick the chair of the agency. The president nominates commissioners, and the Senate has to confirm them. Commissioners have to be accountable to Congress. They have to go through the White House for their budgets. There are lots of mechanisms for presidential accountability. What having independent, bipartisan commissioners provides is transparency and accountability, so that the people can have faith that the decisions of the agency are being made on the merits and on the level. And that's something that has served the country well for the last 100 years at the FTC, and even longer than that. You know, at the beginning of our republic, the sinking fund was established with no removal for some of the members of it. And so this is not a novel concept. And in fact, 90 years ago, a unanimous Supreme Court agreed that the president should not be able to remove commissioners on the Federal Trade Commission specifically. So it's an agency structure that's really rooted in history and tradition and has served the American people really well.
I mentioned we've been following your story from the very beginning, and we will follow it to the very end. Let's talk once we know what's going to happen.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.